to ask yourself, I'd ask you right now this morning, what sorts of understandings do you have with sins in your life? Because you hear what Jesus has to say, don't you? Whoever hangs on to sin, whoever does what God tells them not to do, in other words, or doesn't do what God says to do, right? Whoever teaches the people around them to do the same as what they do, which we can't help but do, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. It would be better for you to not have any hands than to have hands that sin. And the same goes with feet or anything else. Your number one priority in life as a disciple of Jesus can't be anything except to be an enemy of sin. There's a quote in your bulletin. It says, there's only one real tragedy in life, and that is to not be a saint, to not be good. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we look at Jesus, and in confessing that he alone is good, we forget why it is that he came to be good. He came to be good so that we could be good. He came to make us holy ones, saints, God's own children, just as he is God's own child, his own son. Are you radically anti-sin? Sometimes we take shelter in that forgiveness piece and make it almost an excuse for us so that we can go on sinning. Jesus won't have it. Are you radically anti-sin? That's where Jesus wants to get us today. I have to admit, it was fairly late in my life that I finally adopted what you could call a radical anti-sin stance. What I mean is, I think I went through stages as regards my understanding with sin. And, first of all, when I was a kid, I think, I was figuring out what sin was, innocently enough. I was listening to my parents and watching them. I was listening to what they said at church. I was, God help me, watching stuff on TV, trying to figure out what the difference was between good and evil, good and bad. And at some point, that turned into, inevitably, figuring out what I thought about sins, not just what the authorities said. And here's what I think I figured out at some point for myself. I think I basically came down on this, that they're, for the most part, costly, right? I see that sins cost you something sometimes, but also unavoidable, and sometimes a lot of fun. And so I came to have what you might call an understanding with sin. Started figuring out, how much sin could I afford? Because I didn't want to get in too much trouble, right? And I saw what happened when you had too much. But I didn't stay there either. And what that did as I kind of was a teenager and began to be a young adult, that inevitably led to figuring out how I could minimize the cost of sin. That is, how I could sin without getting in trouble. Does track familiar to any of y'all? You don't have to raise your hand. But I found that by this time, as I look back anyway, I can see that what had happened is I had become mostly on the side of sin. Right? I was figuring out how to keep it around, how I could manage to be that way and still live. Now, I should probably say this. This is not my whole history with sin. This is just my side of it. Because at the same time, I have to tell you, there was something radically opposite to all of that was happening. It's just I didn't have a whole lot to do with it. All this time, since I was little, all through becoming a young adult, God was speaking to me, showing me things, and teaching me lessons. And if I had to sum up kind of what he was doing, it was this. Through my parents and through the school that I had and through coming to church, through the music that we sang, that we sang the same Gloria when I was growing up as y'all just sang this morning.